There you go.
Go
All right, now it's off to order at 6:30, the community finance committee meeting for December 10th. Roll call.
Mr. Rodriguez.
Here.
Mr. Briskman.
Here.
Mr. Pansky.
Here.
Mr. Davis.
Here.
Dr. Firman. Ms. Guerrero. Mr. Imam.
Here.
Dr. Johnson.
Here.
Mr. Colon.
Here.
Mr. Miller.
Here.
Dr. Odell. Here.
All right, that brings us to item 2, approval of the October 15th, 2024 minutes for the meeting. Can I get a first and second?
Second, first, sorry.
Second. All right, Cal and Kevin, any changes? Anybody, comments? No?
Just, I don't know how you do it, Lisa. They're so detailed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are you gonna take roll? Or, please do.
Voice vote.
Yeah.
Yep.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, motion carries. All right, item 3 is public comment.
Sure. 9:49.
No. Bob, did you sign up? No, okay. Make sure. All right, item 4A, the report on the 2023-2024 financial audit. I'll turn it over to Tony and then. Yeah, okay.
Yes. Great. It's
Thank you.
at the time of the year when we review our prior fiscal year. So our audit has now been complete, and we are in our second year now with Lauterbach and Amen doing the financial audit for the district. We'll go through the main highlights tonight, and then the audit this year will also be presented in January to the Board of Education. Before I turn it over to McCade, I will just let Brian speak on anything I may have glossed over.
No, nothing to add at this point. Yeah, so McCade Thorpe from Lauterbach and Amen is here tonight. He was one of the lead members on our audit team this year, so he's going to be giving kind of a brief overview of how things went and touching on some of the highlights of the audit report itself.
So thank you, Brian. Thank you, Tony, for another successful audit year. As Tony Bryan said, my name is McCade Thorpe. I'm an audit manager from Lauterbach and Amen. And I was the manager for the audit last year and also this year. And I can say I'm extremely impressed with Brian and his team for how Brian is able to have the audit go so quickly in a school district that is complicated. To be able to do that all remotely speaks to his leadership and also Tony's leadership. So thank you again for another very easy, successful year. So to go in, to show that it was a successful year. Also, if there's any questions at all, please just ask. It's meant to be informal and more of a conversation. In doing the ISB AFR, which we need to essentially takes all the financials and puts it to a form that we submit to ISB. Part of that is they look at different items to create what they call the financial profile score. So it kind of gives a high health establishment of the district. And the district, once again, received the highest profile score, which is a 4.00. So congratulations again on receiving that score. And then to keep the congratulations going, we're going to be going into the main booklet is the annual comprehensive financial report. So we will be going to page number 9. Everybody has it on PDF. Yeah, perfect. So on page 9, this is your ASVO award for the June 30th, 2023 fiscal year. So congratulations on receiving that award again. And we also have submitted the June 30th, 2024 audit to ASVO, and we expect to receive for the district to receive the award again for this fiscal year. And then we'll turn to page number 15. keep the congratulations going. The, apologies, skipped a few pages. Page number 12. This is your audit opinion. And once again, the district received the highest opinion, which is the unqualified audit opinion. So congratulations again. And this is also consistent with last year's audit as well. Okay, so we'll go to page number 18. It's titled at the top, Management's Discussion and Analysis. So what these next few pages do is it provides more of a narrative of the past fiscal year. What I like most about this section is we fill in the numbers. So we kind of have a cookie cutter format that we fill in for the district. We send it to Brian and Tony, and then they go in and they're able to add their own words to explain why certain balances either increase or decrease from last year to this year. So really it allows the district to kind of tell its own story instead of just relying on the numbers. And then also this is a great few pages for those who are visual learners. There's charts and graphs later on in the pages. Okay, we're going to jump to the financials now, which start on page number 31. This is going to be your balance sheet. So what this financial statement looks at is it looks at the fund level. So we have the general fund, which is mainly your educational fund. It also includes working cash for it. And then you have your other funds, your operations and maintenance, capital projects, and then your non-major, which would be your debt service, your transportation, high-ref, social security, and so forth. So your balance sheet is showing your assets, so your cash and investments, and then any property taxes is your receivables. Then it shows your liabilities, so any accounts payable, so any invoices that were hadn't been paid as of year end, but there were services done before. Then your deferred items, which is mainly your property taxes, and then of course your ending fund balance. So then we'll flip over to page number 33. So this is going to look familiar with the same fund setup, general operations, main capital project, but this is now your income statement. All right, so this is going to show your revenues, your expenditures, then if there's any transfers in or out, then your ending fund balance. So revenues mainly driven by your property taxes, expenditures kind of see a high with construction, teacher salary, and so forth, and then your transfers in and out. And then of course your fund balance. One thing I like to bring to your attention is so for this fiscal year in general, which once again that's your education, your working cash report, is it increased by about 17%. So it's the net change, so 7.2 million. And now your general fund balance is at 49.4 million, which if we look at your total expenditures, so we take out the on behalf expenditures, you're looking at about 72.9 million in your operating expenditures. That your fund balance right now covers about 68% of that. So it's a very healthy fund balance. So the district, that's a great fund balance to be at. So I just wanted to bring awareness there. Okay, so now we're going to go to the notes to the financial statement. This will start on page number 38. So what these next few pages go into is the real meat and potatoes of the audit. It goes into our audit methodology and comparison with the district's accounting methodology, and how we performed our testing to be in line with GASB standards, which GASB is the Government Accounting Standard Board. They essentially provide us with how we should be auditing, and kind of so this is very dense, very hard accounting verbiage, but kind of some good information that you can get out of here. There's pages that speak on capital assets, so how many buildings and equipment and so forth the district currently has that takes in regards the depreciation, so what the net value is as of year end. It also goes into your long-term debt. So it sees what principal was, how much principal is paid off during the year and how much principal is due next year. So like I said, very kind of dense, very a lot of stuff going on. So please, if you're reading through, Brian and Tony both have my email. Please reach out if there's any questions. Okay, now we're going to flip back quite a bit in the report. To page 88. So this is going to look familiar. It's going to be showing the income statement. However, we are just looking at the general fund. So once again, your education, tort work, and working cash. But now you're going to see the columns look different. There's an original budget, final budget, actual, and then variance with final budget. So original budget is what was approved in early last summer. Final budget is if there was any amendments, what that new budget value is. And then actual is what the actual amounts were as of year end. And variance is just if there wasn't, if it was over the budget or if it was under the budget, what the actuals were. So if you recall, earlier on, I mentioned there was about a 7.2 million increase in fund balance. So what you can kind of do is kind of look through here, look to see, is there a certain area where revenue was higher? Was there a certain area where expenditures were lower than expected? That kind of led to this gain in fund balance. Okay, so I'm going to pause there before moving on to the management letter. Are there any questions regarding the annual comprehensive report?
Guess I just have one question about the page that we're on now, which I don't know what page this is, but it's the one we're looking at with the revenues.
Yep.
So why are the investment earnings so much higher than the budgeted investment earnings?
So Brian could probably speak more of this, but what we've been seeing is investments are trying to do better, right? It's a very volatile account that's hard to budget for because like a few years ago we had COVID, right? And a lot of our districts, they had debit balance in the revenues just because of where the banking industry was. So if anything, it's a great sign, right? The investments did better than what was expected. But it's really contingent on just how the market's doing as of year end. Brian, I don't know if you have anything else you wanted to add there.
Yeah, that's the gist of it. And the budget gets prepared on a cash basis. So when we budget for interest, we're just putting into the budget what we expect to receive in coupon payments on those investments, as well as with the monthly interest that comes in on the money market account. When the audit gets done, there are a couple of accrual entries that get adjusted to interest income. One being that there's a reclassification of the investments from a cost value to a market value. So like McCade was saying, when the market's doing well, the market value on those investments is higher than the cost value that we're carrying on our books. So that accrual then bumps up our interest income quite a bit.
And we're required to look at entry from GASB 36. It was quite a bit ago where GASB requires us to show the investments at market for the financials.
I got it. So, but I know there's a couple of, I mean, we've talked about the fact that a couple, some of the balances are sort of tied up in lower interest funds and things. So I guess my question is, it seems like the investments are conservative, I know, so I'm just surprised that we would be off by this much in the budgeting, since we kind of know how the funds are invested. I mean, it's good news, but
yeah. It's just that difference in the basis of accounting is cash basis versus accrual basis.
Okay.
Yes, like the market value, I'm not sure why GASB said so, but we kind of have to look at it as what the district was to sell all their investments as of 6/30, right? The district's not going to do that, right? But that's how we have to show it. So it's a little bit of a tough number, but yeah, I get your question though. But we get that question quite a bit, so.
Could it miss in the other way, the other direction?
What you're saying if it was,
Yeah, like if the market performed worse.
yeah, so like going back to COVID, right? That's why it was a very, we got a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Because, right, you would see that, you say, oh my gosh, we have a negative there, what's going on? And it's like, and you have to explain, it's COVID, things aren't really doing well, you know, bank wise right now. This is what would happen if everything was sold, obviously, you're not going to be doing that, right? So. It's,
Got it, thank you.
any other questions for moving on? All right, like I said too, if there's any questions that come up, I know it's a lot of reading, please don't hesitate to reach out. Okay, so we're gonna go to the smaller packet now, your management letter. So we kind of talk about briefly what a management letter is. I like to kind of categorize it in 3 levels. There's level 1 comments where it's more informative. So, GASB Government Accounting Standard Board, they let us know, hey, there's these new standards coming out that were required if it's 2 years out for implementation. So for us, it'll be 2026, June 30th, 2026. We just have to let the district know, just so you guys can prepare. And then also we'll work with Ryan and Tony to make sure the district is ready for these. We don't like surprises as auditors. So we want you guys to know as soon as possible. And then the next level is more more best practice. So things that we see other districts do in the industry that we just want to make sure the district is operating as efficiently as possible. So just giving you guys recommendations there. And then the last level is operational. So these are items that, you know, need to be looked at or anything. So happy to say there were no operational items. There was in our control testing, there were no recommendations there. There's a great level of segregation of duties where live eyes are looking at. There's always at least 2 set of eyes. Sometimes there's 3 set of eyes looking at things, looking at invoices and so forth. So that's great to hear from us. So for this year, there were 3 current year recommendations. The first 2 are informative. So GASB 102 and GASB Standard 103. So these are just 102 is looking mainly at certain risk disclosure. Really, this is just going to be more work for the auditors. So we're going to need to beef up our footnote disclosure regarding risk. But it's going to be pretty standard, right? The school districts, you're pretty limited to your revenues. A lot of it's property taxes, your grants. So we're not really expecting much work to be done with this standard. Then the next one, GASB, and that's being implemented in 2025. GASB 103 is a financial reporting model improvements. Once again, GASB wants to put more work on us. So just your audit report's going to look a little bit different. June 30th, 2026. But once again, we'll kind of be more handled by us. So, but at least we got 2 years of. Then the other current year recommendation, just were funds over budget, which Brian kind of provided an explanation there. For that, just and then prior comments, there were 5 total where I would say most likely 3 out of the 5, and I'll get into on kind of doing the half in, half out. So start off the implemented GASB 100 accounting changes and error corrections. So the district didn't have any major accounting changes. An example would be if you changed how you recognize your property taxes. There was no example of this, and also this standard was not implemented during the year because it didn't apply to the district. Then the next standard is GASB 101 composite absences. This will be implemented next year. This will be looking, so your composite absences are if an employee was to leave during the year and they have accrued a certain amount of PTO, how much the district would have to pay out said employee. It kind of just looks at the whole district as a whole. Now, it's gonna be looking at more of the sick time is kind of gonna be brought more into recognition of the calculation. However, we'll work with Brian and Tony to read the personnel policy to see if that even applies. And then the next two comments, which is why I kind of implemented, is capital assets in your outstanding check write-off policy. So both these policies were passed in August of 2024. So since it was just after the year end, we have to include them in the management letter, but these comments will be marked as implemented for next year's audit since it was passed during fiscal year 25. And then the last comment was just the deficit fund balance within medical insurance, which Brian kind of provided some explanation there as to how the district is going to work on that fund balance there. So I will pause there. If there's any questions over the range. Once again, these are just recommendations. Overall, the district is performing at a very, very high level. I'll say Oak Park Group Forest is one of my favorite clientele because I live in LaGrange and I actually have a lot of buddies that live around here. So I'm always like pretty pumped, you know, coming over here. And your school is beautiful. So I get lost in it every time, but
I did like how when you were lost tonight, you called the person who lived in Kentucky to help punch you out.
I was able to get let in. Awesome. Well, like I said, if there's any questions that come up, please don't hesitate to reach out. Yeah, and then so next steps will be we'll work to submit the ISB AFR to ISB. And we'll see you guys next year.
I have a question.
Yeah.
In one of the, in the management letter, you mentioned we look at funds over balance. I mean, there's a section 3 funds over budget, I'm sorry.
Yes,
Is it just over or is it under as well?
just over.
Okay.
So that's a requirement from GASB that we have to provide.
That kind of, that dictates what a budget philosophy will be then. You never want to be over and it's not hit the target. It kind of steers you to a certain place.
Yeah.
Any other questions? No?
Cool.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a different question, not related to the report, but related to the audit in general, if I could raise it, just. You know, and it's a question I've kind of thrown out there, but it's from my experience more in the corporate world and audits, you know, the audit is a bigger and bigger deal in today's world. And so I'm just questioning from a governance standpoint, you know, what are we handling everything? You know, I'm familiar with where you have an audit committee that reviews it and it signs off on it. I mean, a lot of rigor associated with the audit, and the board really, you know, stands behind that. And I'm just questioning from a procedural standpoint if what we're doing is what we need to be doing, and do we need to make any changes from that context? I mean, as it is, it's being presented here to the CFC, right? This is really intended for the board, correct? The audit?
It's about half and half. We do half for finance committees, half for the board. It depends on.
But it's not, it's for the, I mean, it's, so again, it's a board responsibility, so I'm just questioning, is there anything that, and I don't have an answer, I'm just looking in the climate, is there anything we need to do differently from a procedural standpoint?
just to reiterate too, because I did hear this as we talked about this at this time last year. So we will be going through this presentation with the board again in January instead of just the CFC this year.
Okay.
And then one thing I'd like to just point out more from a this is specific to school district audits, but when we let off with that the ASBO Association for Excellence in Financial Reporting, that is really an above and beyond certificate that our statements are prepared to more detail than the state requires, but that meet a national level of rigor. So that is just a testament to kind of the work that goes into the preparation of the audit.
A question about, I don't know, if it's best practice that kind of borrows from conversations we've had more about comparative districts. What do other districts do? You said it's kind of split half and half. Some go to the boards, some go to their finance committee meetings. Tom, I think you've kind of encouraged us to do both, right?
Yes.
With this, and to what extent is that something that is typical in other districts? And is there a reason for us to do one versus the other?
There's not really a right or wrong answer per se, as long as it's getting presented, that's the main point, right? Do we typically do both board and finance? No, we don't, usually it's one or the other, but of course, we're happy to. But it's whatever, every district's a little bit different, right? Some finance committees are more informal, and they like to sit down and ask, questions, whereas the board meetings are more formal, right? So it's really dependent on however the district sees fit.
Just to clarify, too, the rest of those finance committees actually, so 4 of us here are just community members. I feel like sometimes those finance committees are really just an offset of board members. A lot of times, so it's more like half.
Correct, yeah.
More some of the finance committees are just really just some board members. There's like unique finance committee where we're actually community members and board members.
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
Some finance committees are larger than others, but it flux, so.
Not to believe it, I think school boards though could never have more than 2 on a finance committee like this, because you
Oh, okay.
run the risk of breaking
I feel like the village vote part
all
is
my
like
rules.
is the village president and 3 trustees or something are a finance committee.
Yeah, right, might be, I think village is now.
Anything else? All right.
Cool.
Thanks.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 4B, a discussion of the financial dashboard. Tony or Greg, you want to do that?
Yeah, I'll leave that, and I've got a handout to facilitate that conversation. So this is a topic that you all might remember from last spring, because we had asked the CFC to suggest what might be a few good metrics to be including in a financial dashboard. And Member Miller was kind enough to prepare actually, I think, 17 different charts for us to consider. And as of this fall, Tom and I are working this topic as well, because it's a board goal to have a financial dashboard that will be public facing. And so this month, we're kind of closing in on the small number of metrics that we think will constitute a minimum viable product for a dashboard. A number of those metrics have to do with things like per pupil expenditures. And in general, when you think about benchmarking and dashboard type data, it's important to have relevant benchmarks. Because with 800 some districts, comparing us against state metrics isn't all that useful. And so you as committee members may be already familiar with the notion that there is a set of peer districts that have been established. And I think that originated by this committee. Is that true, Tom, or do you think the board just made that up about 3 years ago?
No, the board didn't, make it up. It did come, this committee was involved in, or a predecessor of it.
Right, I think it predates this.
Okay.
It, I would say a predecessor.
Okay, so basically the list you see here on one side of the sheet, on the sheet page number 22. This is essentially a legacy list of peer districts that's been floating around here for a while. But it hasn't really been revisited and codified in a formal way. So on this page 22, you see a list of 7 other districts. And then there are some parameters that define the commonalities of those districts off to the right. And that list of commonalities is my understanding of this informal list. So in discussing with Tom, what we want to do in order to finalize the dashboard is make sure we're dealing with the right comparison districts. So our request to the CFC, and I realize we're not going to do this live necessarily tonight, although we could maybe discuss some of these inputs. We want to reaffirm the list of criteria that we should use to select peer districts. And then also some rules of the road around how often should we revisit this list? How often can a district roll on or roll off? And then once we get kind of a final take on that from CFC, Tom and I would like to convert this into policy. Now, for your reference, on the flip side of this sheet, on the side that's numbered slide 23, is an example of how another district has used peer districts and defined them. And on this slide, you'll see, and there's the methodology is laid out, some breakdown of the criteria and so forth. So what I would hope we can do is get to something similar to what's on 23. Doesn't necessarily have to be quite that involved, but we certainly want to make sure that we're all stacking hands on what are the essential criteria that should define OPRS true peer districts. The last thing I'll say is OPRF is kind of a unique place. The D200 is a unique place because it's one school and it's high school only. So there aren't necessarily going to be 15, 20, 25 peers. That's the reason that this informal list is already so short. But it's kind of a case of making sure that perfection is not the enemy of the good. You're never going to you're never going to arrive truly at precise peers, but this is about as close as you can get the landscape. So I'll pause there and welcome any feedback. And then what we might want to do with our time right now is just talk through the criteria that is shown here on the right. 6 different inputs there. Talk about that. So I'm going to pause. Anyone have any comments? Yes.
Yeah, I just have one clarifying comment that's on your paper, but just if you've been following, recent board presentation, including the work of Dr. Johnson, this is intended to be a financial peer district, not necessarily from an academic and student. This is about the resource side. So there's other work that's being done as we look at our state report card performance and aspirational that is looking at different sets of peer districts and actually schools. So 2 different populations that may or may not overlap. But this for this discussion is financial peer districts, which is what the word is. I'm just emphasizing that because of the context of what may have been other discussions that you've heard.
and the I mean, this was taken based on talking to other districts and, you know, in our community and looking at community, you know, criteria. I'll give the background just to bring it. So, from a quote unquote pure district financial, I would say 10 years ago, I guess the standard was NWPA, okay, Northwest, help me.
Personnel association.
Yeah. Northwest Personnel Association was what was used as this district's peer group, okay? That was what was used. The criteria for NWPA is what?
It's just a bunch of HR.
You gotta
From the
pay,
northwest suburbs to get.
You need
Not
to-
designed for financial.
you need to pay the dues.
I don't even know if they have.
Yeah,
but-
okay, you need to join the club is what it is. And so, but that's what was used as for peers, and it was used, I would say, somewhat you know, selectively. Right, where in some cases we can kind of take these ones and throw them out and not throw them out when we looked at it, so it went from that to. Borrowing the criteria from other districts to get down to what is presented here, but we need to go beyond that.
I actually haven't been present in these meetings for a while, and now I'm chiming in and asking all these questions, but Graham. Did you apply these 6 criteria anew to get this list of districts, or is this the existing list of districts that kind of is historic? For our comparative, and you're also suggesting independent of that, the criteria.
So this is just piecing the breadcrumbs together.
Yeah, okay.
I find a breadcrumb that's got this list. And then I must have had some breadcrumb or another that I understood this is the criteria. But I would say this, we will want to reaffirm. You know, once we say, yeah, these are the 6 criteria, let's double check. Because that actually came up. One of them we thought should be on this list would be Evanston Township, is it, Bob? Yeah,
200.
202.
202.
yeah,
And so the play-by-play is that this list, the date of it would be 2022. Right, when was the contract negotiation?
Yeah, it would be negotiations.
Okay, the last teacher contract negotiations, this, as part of that process, okay, this was refreshed, okay, to come up with this list, and these are the ones that met the criteria that were used at that time, and Evanston 202 was a very near miss. In the one criteria, which is the percent,
number 3, right?
free, reduce and free lunch, they were greater than the 200% of OPRF, probably by a small amount. And so you will actually see them on some of the peer lists and not on others, just because of their proximity in so many ways, which is.
To illustrate your point then, yeah, so that's the historic, the state report card has an advanced school comparison, right, that allows you to play with several factors for this purpose. It does not have PTEL in there, nor does it have EVF as one of the drop down that I used to sort, but the other 4 criteria are, and just, I couldn't make mistakes, I just did this really quickly right now, but just to illustrate the point. Of the 7 additional districts besides ours on the left list, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Did not pop up in the list when I, quickly try to make this happen. So it's a great conversation for us to have as a district. It seems timely.
Yeah, that's a good catch, because again, we have to affirm the criteria and then actually check.
And I would say it does pop up. But there's gonna be changes.
Yeah, so So there's two questions for us. The main one are criteria updates. Beyond the six, or one or the other. I don't remember this detail one. I don't know why we have to. We're all subject to detail, so I don't know what that was. I don't remember why we had that.
That was not one that we
That's just been carried over.
used.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, it,
I might have that.
Simpler list.
Yeah, who knows? Yeah, I don't remember that one. I do remember Edison though, yeah, it was very close, and we talked about it. And like, well, why isn't that, should we include it or not include it? I couldn't find any details, but I just vaguely remember that. So, and when you using this for which, I did talk about Tony. Does this lead into the, because we talked previously about the financial dashboard, they focused on the project dashboard first, right? And then now that that's live, they're working on this financial dashboard, which for Graham, in order to have a financial dashboard, you need to kind of also have the comparisons listed. So is there any, and you don't have to have the answer tonight, if there's any, Steve's an expert in this stuff of now comparisons back in his old days of comparing districts of other criteria that you may want to include, not include, and or partially how often we think should be reviewed, as if they write a policy to be like, basically, well, like, just making spitballing here, you might have a policy that says review financial peer districts every 2 years. Every year, or something, or every new board that starts or something.
And also the definitions or the criteria that used.
and how many? Because I mean,
Yeah.
if you set these criteria and according to what Greg just said, if the answer comes out that we have one peer district, then that's really not gonna help us much, so the only way to fix that is to change the dials. Right, because we're trying to compare ourselves to ourselves, so at some point,
We're doing good.
we think we're the best at one. So I would think that we would wanna have kind of a min and max of number of peers, just so that we're not tripping over each other with too many and comparing ourselves to ourselves for too few. As a thought.
I'm sure I had something to do with the D97 sort of methodology making its way over here, working with the fork committee there at one point in time. To your point, Tom, yeah, I agree that I think these are the right metrics. We've got district size, district demographics, and district resources. You know, but the 50 to 200 to me aren't magic numbers. Those are ones that I think maybe you expand or squeeze it based on the number of peer districts. They kind of filter through the other things so that you do have a manageable amount. But one of the things that's not in here that I recall from D97 is that they do 3-year averages for all of these rather than, you know, just looking at a single year's worth of data. So that'll smooth it and you won't have as much in and outs over time, I think, especially if you are updating it for 2 years data every time. One thing that you want to change on here, number 5, you want EAV per student. Doesn't specify that, but rather than total EAV.
And Steve, your point you just mentioned about the smoothing, that's actually listed in the methodology bullets on D97.
Yeah.
And on the other page.
Yeah, I didn't just go into that, I stole that too. It's like, Bob probably gets most of the credit for.
And then to respond to what Greg said about PTEL, I think PTEL is not statewide, right? So that's the reason to make sure.
And so I think D97 doesn't specifically call it out, but instead they have a list of counties that they're only looking within, and they're all PTEL counties. And so 2 different ways where you can sort of accomplish the same thing.
Yeah. And then
I had one question. I don't know if anybody from the district knows off the top of their head, but do you know what your adequacy percentage is? EBF?
27.
Okay, I guess 120 and then did quick math.
After the current.
So quick math, it's 67% to 150% of that pretty much is the whole state. Because it's like it goes from 80 to 180 or something like that. So if you wanted to keep the EBF target in, you might need to tweak that one.
I thought this one was the EDF thing, was your idea. You don't remember that?
It probably was.
138 is the answer to this.
Okay,
I don't think it changed the number of districts involved.
but
But
I
it-
know what I'm saying, it's so wide with those parameters that almost everybody's gonna fall in.
But it did put that measure then in front so that you could see and compare, that's part of it, is just bringing exposure to it, so.
I think it's certainly valuable to, do you know which tier each of the districts is in this group, although I would guess most of them are 3 or 4. But the late part maybe not.
Okay, that's great input, and this is a very productive conversation because kind of don't have to wait for future feedback from CSC, because what we're saying here is we're adopting the methodology on page 23. I'll fix that, it's EAD per student on number 5.
23 or 22?
So small.
23 has the district 97 methodology. 22 is our list. And then we just need to think about item 6, which is what's a EBF boundary that makes sense.
And I think we need to look at what the output of this gives us, right?
Like run some.
Run it, and
tests.
if we come up with one district, then the way these general, the 50 to 200, right? Is a half to 2, 1 over X to X. So, we could change X to widen or loosen the noose.
So that's a good discussion point then. What do we think a minimum number of peer districts should be so we have enough of a relevant benchmark?
What I used to say when I was working with districts to group, finding peer groups and doing analysis, a lot of it depends on how you're ultimately gonna present the analysis, because a larger size group is gonna be less wieldy, and so if we're thinking about what the dashboard's gonna look like, you might wanna keep the number smaller. I feel like D97's list is pretty high count that might not work for me in whatever format you're looking at, but I would say 8 to 12 is a good number. Throw it in there, maybe I'll eat. Obviously, we need to do more scientific.
Okay, so I'll imagine that a dashboard is comparing things like per pupil spending, salaries and benefits per student.
Yeah, and I'm talking about less about what you're showing, but how you're showing it, like charts and graphs and things.
Oh, okay.
That if you end up with lots of really skinny little bar charts because you've got 25 districts, and you've got really long district names, and suddenly it just becomes harder to actually visually see what the data is.
Okay, I see your point. So Steve likes 8 to 12. And that's mainly just from a visualization standpoint, or? is
Yeah, I'm
that
no
also from a-
statistician, so I don't know that someone would say statistically that's a good number or not, but just truly from a visualization standpoint and being able to deliver something that's consumable, I feel like
Okay,
that's reasonable.
sufficiency of sample size. Do we think 8 to 12 is? My gut feels like that's okay.
Well, and what you could do too is see if we wanted to use the Collar County group as our geographic filter as opposed to P-TEL, how many high school districts are there in that area, and then how many of them, does 8 to 12 make up? And I would guess there's 3 dozen, maybe more.
High school
High school
districts,
districts in the Collar counties, most of Cook County, but then when you get into the rest of the Collar County, there's a lot of unit districts and fewer high school districts.
Your data that you were presenting, had a total of 76 is what I had, but that was schools or districts?
I was, the comparison I did was school specific.
Okay.
And it had 76 number, I think, was the number of school districts that were 2,000 or more. High schools that were 2,000 or more, state. Students or more.
The state,
In the state, of which schools?
and but you're talking about.
It's schools, but not districts, so that's why it's a different analysis, but I agree with you, you're saying find if we're saying 8 to 12 and there are 12 in total, we're kind of, saying, we're going the other way, we're saying everybody's our peer, so it should be some fraction.
The two sets of specs that I used for the state report card resulted in 8 and 11. Right, so right within that range.
Yeah.
Excellent, this is great input, I think.
In other words, look at 8 to 12 as a number percent. That knows roughly what it's at, like average of 10.
But the suggestion was verify what's the population of schools or districts within the Collier County region. And take, 25% to a third or something like that, right? Some percentage of the number of districts in the counties. As opposed to just making it up.
Yeah.
So somebody would need to provide that information, how many school districts or schools, districts? High school only districts are in that group of counties, which.
Yeah. But then they're still gonna have to then also fit our 6 criteria to be genuine comparisons. So we'll first answer that question. What's the total universe? And then if we can arrive at 8 to 12 peers, that'll be good, but we're gonna run it 2 times, see what we get.
But if it comes out to be about a quarter to a third of the districts out of the population of districts, that seems about right. Right, like if it was 75%, that'd be too many, 2%, that would be too few, but a quarter to a third seems about right to me.
Considering that you're already segmenting it to
Yeah.
geography and high school, so
Right.
you're taking the number down from the universe to starting.
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you all, and if there are any other ideas pop in your head, feel free to shoot me a comment.
I had a question, why wouldn't we do single building only? Wouldn't that narrow it down even more?
Not very many.
Yeah, that would get down to one real, where,
Do you want to have one building?
No,
But they're not a high school district.
Yeah, it's unit district, right?
But there are a handful for sure.
Yeah.
Like Lions in Lake Park, they have 2 campuses, but it's one sort of 9-12 program.
Niles, Leiden, Evanston,
But even more, more.
Morton. I don't think Morton's middle school.
Morton has east and west.
No, it's just.
I think they have a combined athletic program, but I think there's still
Yeah,
2.
One high
I
school.
think they have a freshman center and 2 10-12.
Like Lions Township.
Yeah, but 2 campuses, he said 1 building, I'm kind of focusing. buildings.
Oh, I see, I see.
I mean, I guess what's the significance of 1 building, is it?
I don't know, comparing costs and things like that, running 2 buildings versus 1 building.
One of the challenges
Sort
that
of
we've
out
had, it's just, these might be things that are worth being aware of when we're doing analysis and taking a look at our comparatives. One of the challenges that we've had in filling out the evidence-based funding calculator, Tony, is
That gap analysis, yeah.
that gap analysis is that we have so many resources within this one building that are going toward district purposes that wouldn't show up if a school outside of, in a multi-school district, we're gonna be doing the EDF calculator. Does that make sense? Because this district has a lot of those. So what you're saying would help to kind of tease that out, or at least even the playing field, right? Where your building would have district and building resources in the exact same spot, whereas unit districts don't have that complication. If you're doing high school analysis, but other than that, I don't know.
Thank you, excellent.
Yes.
No,
Good.
great input,
Okay.
thanks everybody.
So we'll look forward to that in 20,000. Got a whole year. All right. Anything else today? Right, item 4C is the review of the financial projections and the key assumptions. That's so weird.
Again, both, I'll intro it, kick it off Brian, to talk through. But really here, we, so much of what we do involves that, future forecasting in our 5-year projections. And, as we, well, it's pretty cold outside, we're really not far from kicking off budgeting season for, the next school year. And that starts with then reaffirming our assumptions or recommending any changes that we could see being better with these. So we put together a list of some of the ones we are looking at changing, and I will then turn it over to Brian to walk us through the list.
All right, thanks, Tony. So yeah, it was about a year ago that we developed a new format for summarizing the key assumptions that get used in our 5-year financial projections. And just for everyone's reference, not sure how well you're able to see it there, but I pulled up a copy of it here and shared it on the screen. It's also in your meeting packets on page 234, if you wanted to look at it on your own device. But one of the committee's tasks is to perform an annual review of these assumptions so that we've got a consistent base of them going forward in our future projections, and then we can take into account, any information that's come to us new over the past year that may kind of change our future outlook on things. So I guess for the purpose of kicking things off with this discussion, there were 4 assumptions that I called out in the written report that kind of originated from conversations we've had at previous meetings or shifts in trends that we've noticed internally during the past year. So I wanted to go through those first, and I'll solicit feedback after each one of them, but then we can open it up to other committee members who would like to discuss really any of the other assumptions that fall in this document in more detail. So this is not an end-all be-all like presentation that I'm giving. This is kind of meant to be more open dialogue amongst the committee. So the first assumption that I flagged was the CPI percentage that we use for levy purposes. That's this top line here in the list of assumptions. So currently we're assuming a CPI of 2.5% per year for future years. When we were reviewing the levy at our last meeting, Kathleen pointed out that in the historical data that we showed for CPI, which I believe was a 10-year stretch, the CPI had never reached that number until we had those back-to-back years of 5% in 2022 and 2023. So I thought it would be worth going back and kind of gathering some historical data. Since the inception of PTEL in the 1993 levy year, the average CPI factor has been 2.44%. But probably the more interesting note is if you were to divide that set of data in half, the first 16 years of PTEL, the average was closer to 2.7%, whereas the more recent 16-year period has only averaged 2.2%. And that's even with those couple of years of 5% mixed in there. Now, the challenge with this is that past CPI is not proven to be predictive. And again, I think those 2 years that we had of 5% recently are perfect examples of this, because no one would have expected that to happen, 5 or 6 years ago. But, given that overall average, the 2.44%, it's possible our assumption may be a little on the high end here. The other piece of information that kind of came up during that meeting, and that I just wanted to reiterate again here, is the last two levy years, the district levied less than CPI and left open that option to recapture the differences in future levy years. So, if we take kind of all of this into account, my recommendation that I came up with was to leave our CPI assumption at the 2.5% for the next three levy years. And the reason I chose 3 was just because that is that window that we have of being able to go back and recapture levy dollars if we wanted to. But then beyond that, so when we add, when we get to the next year of financial projections and we add another year on the tail end, then my suggestion is we lower that to 2.25%. I think that will fit us a little bit better within that kind of overall average that we've seen with the history of CPI. In terms of dollars, if we're talking about, a 0.25% reduction in CPI, it's about $200,000 less of revenue per year that would go into our projection model. That would be 5 years out now, or 4 years, 4 or 5 years out. So I just wanted to get the committee members' take on that recommendation.
All right. Sorry.
I still find that number to be high, especially the 2.5%. And I think like the downside of leaving it too high is you're gonna overestimate the revenue, which would be, I think, worse than underestimating the revenue, right? And you can't predict the future of the CPI for sure, but the Fed target is 2%. So I think 2.5 definitely seems high to me, especially, in terms of what's coming. I mean, what we could predict coming in the next couple of years. I know there's that recapture thing, but that I understand why you're rolling that in, but I'm not sure that's the same thing as the CPI assumption. So yeah, my reaction is it still seems high. Even 2.25 seems like a bit high, but I don't know what others see. I mean, if you leave it at 2.5. And really, we get to closer to the Fed target of 2%, that's the inflation target, I know, but of 2%, and you're gonna overestimate your revenue by almost $500,000 in all those years, right? So that doesn't seem ideal.
So it sounds like you'd be in favor, Kathleen, of using a number more like 2%.
I think in my mind, especially as you get further out, 2% is probably about as good as you can predict, because that's the target number, right? And if you look at the history, except for the weird years when it's really high because there's something unpredictable happening, it looks like to me it's closer to 2 or often under 2. So yeah, I think the more conservative number, would be more like 2%.
My earlier disclaimer was I'm no statistician, I'm also no economist, but I'm using 2% in my models right now.
Yeah, that's
It's
my question, my question, is if you go back to our wonderful financial report, okay? You will see in there the values at 2.5, you'll see 2.25, you'll see 3% in the different actuarial models that are part of these different pension, so there is no uniformity in what this number is. And what's frustrated me is that we have, even within our own community, we have D97 and D200 historically have used different numbers,
we're in the same community. I don't know why their CPI is different than ours, but so. But I thank you, Brian. I mean, the fact that we have data that says at least we know what the historical average
Yeah.
is, at least allows us to make, say, we're not grossly off here, okay?
What's the downside of using a lower number?
I wouldn't say there's a downside. It is the more, conservative approach. I guess if you were searching for a downside, I guess ultimately the way the financial projection looks currently is we are residing, our fund balance resides kind of in that, 29 to 34% range in the farthest years of the projection. So lowering that levy revenue would then potentially bring the percentage down a couple percentage points and make us look a little worse. But then if CPI comes in higher, that's obviously the way you would want to miss, like you were saying.
And I would say that just, the downside to me is more, if you look at all of the assumptions, if every assumption is on the highly conservative side, okay, I will tell you that from a district's performance standpoint, part of the reason we got into our fund balance of being up through the roof is because we had all these assumptions that were extremely conservative. And you pile conservative on top of conservatives, and you end up missing the target. So I would say you need to take your assumptions and then look at your actual performance. And that should be part of an indicator. Are you overly conservative or overly general? But you can't just, in my opinion, look at one indicator. It's philosophy as a whole. And if you're continuing to generate either surpluses or deficits versus what you thought you're doing, then you got to change the dial.
I like the surplus. I think if we go 2% as opposed to 2.25%, depending on what the teacher salaries are, the percentage raises next year, because that's our biggest expense, it'll eat up at our surplus. So I think we need to keep that in mind too. Because we're kind of in the 0.5% range, because that's our biggest expense. And depending on when your teacher negotiations were, if it was during COVID, everybody shot for, max raises because no one knew when COVID would be over. And, everybody complained about they couldn't buy eggs or a gallon of gas and stuff. So they all got 4 to 5% raises going forward for the next 4 years. So depending on when that's over, you might want to kind of keep the levy in the 2.5% range so that you don't eat up your surplus paying the teachers.
We also, maybe for clarity's standpoint, and Brian, let me know with the way you build this model out, is maybe we can recognize that in this 2.5% is that ability to recapture if needed, and have a separate line of our CPI projection at 2%, and then the years that we have the ability to recapture, we can put that in there. So it doesn't look like that we're kind of overestimating CPI, but then also accounting for that ability to maneuver if needed.
Yeah, I think that.
Is there any desire by the board to recapture that though, or do we feel like the recommendation would come to do that? Because I don't think it makes sense to build it in unless you're gonna do it. If the CPI is lower, and then that's the beauty of that law, is like now you can build in 2.5, and knowing that if CPI comes in lower, you can still get to 2.5. But the question is that what the district would actually do?
You'll have to ask 7 feet.
2025 levy, let's start planning it now.
You split it with years. He's got 2 years.
No, I mean, that was just an emergency fund concept, right? I mean, the idea of recapture, I mean, you really have no intention of doing that. That's just a break glass in case of emergency.
Something that, you know, taking into factor here, new growth. So that's having a levy increase, you can just, and then, one that's 2 years old, like a recapture where you can, like, refund money. Then you pick that up, that number, I don't know what that number is.
It'd be the errors and I forget the proper terminology, the accounting for the
That's 2 years ago.
Yeah, Cook County does it the levy adjustment.
But yeah.
I call that a recap.
It's like, yeah, it's like, okay. But the recap, you're talking about the other recapture, like, you don't levy the full amount, you can go back to two years, go back. So it's not like Kevin, you want the 2 for the next 5 years, because right now, as presented. They have 2.5 for the first 3 years, and then the last 2 years out, 2.25. You're more at 2% for the next 5.
Yeah.
So they see the 2% too, sort of.
Yeah, not for the current.
Not the current year.
The November numbers come out tomorrow, I can't remember
Yeah,
what's trending, but it's gonna be above 2.
Yeah, the current, trending, again, we could trend now for, but like the next 4 years then.
But beyond this current calendar year for next year's levy,
Yeah.
that'd be it's
It's like the 1 current and the 4, the 2. Well, cal. So it's 5, the rest 2. Okay. The 2, but I with Steve going, for the 4 out years are 2%, but.
Yeah.
The
I
current, the
We're
current
not
year.
quite at 2 yet, right, but.
in a month, we'll know what the next one will be, what January.
Yeah, this was just the 1 year out. Yep. That worked for you guys. Okay. That's where, okay. All right, Brian, the next one you want us to look at?
Okay, so that was 2.5% for the 2025 levy year and 2% in subsequent years.
Yeah, unless you see something different in a month or so. But when it comes out, we'll see, for the following year levy. Yeah, and then the 2% for the 4 out years.
Okay, got it. All right, so then moving on to the next one. The second assumption has to do with our salary contracts. So our current assumption with these is that when a collective bargaining agreement expires, we've taken the increase associated with the final year of the contract and applied that to all future years. As I was looking at this a little more closely, several of the district's current contracts actually incorporate higher raises in the front end of the contract and then lower increases in the final years of the contract. So while it may not change dollars drastically, my recommendation here would be to apply an average of the annual increases of our existing salary contract and apply that average to future years, just to keep us from underestimating salaries in later years of the projection. And any thoughts on that one, or anybody that has another proposal would like to keep it as is, or
I like that one. I think the average makes sense.
Yeah. That sounds fine to me. What's the next for the major, for the facilities contract, or that was done? That 2 years for that? Okay. So like half of the projection. Okay. Agree with that one, Brian?
okay. Number 3 is health insurance premiums, which has been a big topic at the district in the last few months here. So current assumption is an increase of 7% per year. Just to kind of give a little history, the district had kind of a rough 3-year stretch from 2021 to 2023 that saw claims expenses outpacing the revenues we were bringing in from premiums in those years. And that was actually despite making a multitude of changes to insurance plans, healthcare strategies, and whatnot to try to offset some of those. And what this did is it eventually put our medical insurance fund in a deficit balance. Actually, we saw this in the management letter of the audit as well. So in response, the district has increased premiums by more than 9% in both 2024 and 2025. So we've seen some improvement in the deficit. Still, remains to be seen what will happen in 2025, obviously. But the expectation is that the deficit won't be completely gone by the end of 2025. So, going forward, we'll obviously have to continue looking at a combination of strategies to try to reestablish a reserve in that fund. Things we'll be looking at will be, additional plan changes to the health insurance plans, higher rate increases, and then possibly, renegotiating the percentage split of premiums that get paid between the employees and the district. So as part of this recommendation, I'm proposing that we increase the assumption to 8% until we can kind of get back to a positive fund balance being restored in that medical insurance fund. And then again, if we were to look at that in terms of dollars, a 1% increase in the assumption would equal about $66,000 more of annual expenses.
Question, Brian.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm looking at the summary table, a couple pages in, past the narrative. Am I looking at this wrong? Cause it shows negatives for 2022 and 2023. 3.7, 4.6 negative, but then a 6.7 last year and 5.4, 8.4. This year, it's just trying to align those negatives with what you were saying about some bad years.
Yeah.
Are those numbers the actual change in total insurance cost?
Yes, that's change in total dollars. And the reason we had negatives in those years is it's because of those changes that were made to the insurance plans that either caused people to leave the district's insurance and take insurance through their spouse, or maybe they decided to enroll in a cheaper insurance plan after some of those changes were made. So total dollars, we had less in premiums being paid, but the amount we were collecting in premiums overall was still not keeping up with the claims we were incurring.
Yeah, thank you. This adjustment makes sense to me. I think you're still, below typical medical inflation. I think it's still around 10%, so 8% makes sense to me. If you think that's reasonable based on your experience. To your plans.
I asked at work, that people they've never seen that 8 to 10% at the end of the year. The last couple of years, and they don't see that trend ending. So. All right, Brian. Good. Okay on that one.
All right.
You have one more, right?
Yes, one more. And this one has to do with the enrollment. So the enrollment numbers in our assumption come from an enrollment projection that is performed by an outside consulting firm. The most recent one happened in spring of 2023 by RSP and Associates. Typically, the district has had this projection refreshed every 4 years. As with any projection, the forecasts do become less reliable the further out you go. But it can also be quite costly to update the projection more frequently than that 4-year period. So actually, at the same time that we had the last outside demographic study done in 2023, I also began running an internal set of enrollment projections just to give us a second data set that could be updated on an annual basis. And therefore, it could react more quickly to any variances that we see in class sizes from the previous year. So maybe the best way to show this is to look at page 237 in the packet that compares the two different projection models, and I'll kind of give you a sense of what stuck out to me when I was looking at this. So, at the top of this page, I'm gonna blow this up a little bit. So these are the first 2 years of the projection. The district's actual enrollment is on the left. The projections that came from the RSP model in the middle, and then the district's internal projections on the right. So, year one, both models were very close to what we saw in actual enrollment. No surprises there. When you're only going 1 year out, it's much easier to be precise. When we got to year two, again, the totals enrollment for school was not very far off in either model. But one thing I noticed was with the RSP model, if you look at the freshman and sophomore classes, our actual enrollment for the freshman class in particular came in higher than we were expecting at 853 students. The RSP model was under by 15 students. Our model was under by 18. So neither one of us were expecting that large of a jump in the freshman year class. But what that does is for each year beyond, that higher class size trickles, advances a grade level, and that enrollment stays higher, so that the numbers that were created, 2 years ago are going to continue being lower than they would if we were kind of resetting the enrollment projections on an annual basis. So to kind of illustrate that a little better, the bottom half of the page shows where those projections are looking for the next 3 years. So with the RSP model, you can kind of see in the highlights here that as the freshman year class advances to sophomore year, in most years, we're seeing that enrollment stay pretty flat, maybe a small increase from year to year. But because that freshman year enrollment this year is so much higher at 853, their projection for the sophomore year enrollment is 833 next year, which in all likelihood, we're going to see a number higher than that. We'll see something closer to 850 to 860. So down here at the bottom in the sort of the peach colored highlighted section is the district's internal projection. It resets the baseline after every year that we have a data set of actual enrollment. So your 853 freshman class this year is being projected at 861 in the district's model for next year. End result is, where RSP was projecting that we would be declining close to 100 students next year, we're now thinking that's going to be a decline of somewhere closer to 30. It's possible we could be somewhere in the middle. Maybe it's more like 40 or 50 when all is said and done, because the incoming freshman class is always an unknown. Even though we can pull data from our feeder schools, you still just kind of always have that unknown as to what is the transient population going to be in terms of students moving in and out of the district or switching from private school to public school and so on. In the grand scheme of things, from the financial projection standpoint, this doesn't mean a lot. And the reason is when our enrollment is projected to decrease, our salaries assumption conservatively holds FTE flat in those scenarios. If on the flip side we saw enrollment increases being projected, then we would build in some placeholders for additional FTE. But when we see these decreases, we've always just held the FTE flat. So in terms of the financial impact in our projection, there would be no change. But if we were to switch this assumption to using the district's model, it would kind of give us a 2-year period where we could evaluate how effective the district's internal projections are. And we at least know we would be starting at a more accurate baseline than the RSP model. And if we found that those internal projections are effective, we might also be able to extend that typical 4-year update cycle that we've been using for the demographic studies and achieve some additional cost savings in consulting fees there. So that's kind of the rationale for this recommendation. Again, wanted to seek the committee's feedback on that potential change, though.
I have a couple questions. I'm not real concerned about the change now that I know it doesn't really affect the financial numbers much, but still some more general questions, I guess. I know there was a time when districts 90 and 97 and 200 went together and did the enrollment forecasts jointly, given how the elementary data all feeds in. Is that the case currently?
Currently, the model is just D200.
Because I guess my thought is, I'm a little biased because we work with RSP and I really think their methodology is just pretty impressive and they do great work. But the idea of only doing it every 4 years when 25% of your enrollment comes and goes each year doesn't seem frequent enough, but I understand there's a cost to it. But if you could go in with the 3 districts together and everybody gets some value out of it, and I think it would save money because it's all the same work that they have to do demographically across the communities to do yours. They have to really do most of the work for the other 2 districts too. So the what's the value in having those conversations? If you do want to do an outside analysis again, something to consider.
Now, what does it cost us every 4 years to do this?
The last study was about 14,000.
I just have a question about this is, I think, just for my own knowledge, but so it looks like the projected number of students increases. So like if you look at if you look at 27, 28, for example, in the RSP projection,
Okay.
the seniors, there are expected to be 881 of them, but the previous year they were juniors and there were only 821, right?
Right.
I don't know,
Is that a mistake?
I have no idea what it means, but that is the exact conversation Lori and I were just having.
I have an idea, because it jumped out at me too, but I think it's because of the transition.
Yes.
Students that stay till age 21, right? They're all lumped in
Oh.
grade
They're all
12, probably, right?
right? Yes, that's my memory of it.
Okay,
Took me a while to-
And this is matched out in what you see in our report card data,
Oh.
not to the exact same swing, but you see that increase in that senior year.
Got it. Okay, and then, yeah, so that's the adult students.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
right.
all right, thank you.
The big pearl that that was said in my mind on this is. And I don't know from a discussion standpoint, that this is a financial model, and then this comes back to that conservatism on top of conservatism. So I will tell you that for the first 6 years I was in the district when there was growth, the model was I don't know many models that say if it's going up, you do one thing, but if it's going down, you do another. It just, from a financial model standpoint, that means that we're gonna be conservative on one side and we're gonna be, so it just seems kind of weird. That we would say that if the population is going down, we're just gonna hold things flat from a financial model standpoint.
But it's kind of like prices, right? Like once they go up, it's hard to bring them back down. I assume that because you have a certain number of, you have your staff size and so if the freshman class turns out to be a little bit smaller, it's harder to let people go. I mean, I guess you'd have attrition, but yeah, what are the practices?
It's a bigger question than probably a time for at the moment, but the key change is that the overall population of our school has varied less than what you see the variance would be for any grade level, and so our general practice internally, and it is for all schools. You know, teach freshman one year, you know, you're gonna teach a few more sections of sophomores the following year, and so on, so, right? I mean, you're making those types of changes with in-house rather than overall FTE changes, which is really what we're talking about, so. But
It's just a known point of
it
concern,
is harder,
right?
yeah.
Just check it up as that's a conservative. Or it's either conservative or policy that says it's gonna be what it is, and that means you're gonna drive class sizes in a different direction, right?
Yeah, I guess the question is it just for the estimates? Like, is it just for the projections that the spending stays flat, or does it really?
The staff kind of.
Yeah,
Oh,
This is,
but the thing is, like,
this is a model question, really, at this level.
Okay.
Right? I mean, it's an assumption.
yeah, the question about staffing over time is a little bit different, but it has gone up significantly. So during Tom Stanger, all right, 12 years. They're right.
I had some other thoughts on the conservative topic, looking at the audit results. We talked a little bit about the interest earnings, that was about 20% of the budget variance overall in the ed fund. I think in recent years, we've done a lot to really tighten up the budgeting on the expenditure side, where there used to be a lot of conservatism that would skew the projections. But I did want to talk a little bit more about that line item piece with interest earnings and how forecasting that going forward, and if there's any changes that need to be made to that piece. So it seems like in looking at the rest of the variances, revenues and expenses, nothing else jumped out at me as something that needed adjustments for model going forward. I get the, now that I look at the assumptions here, you've got an assumption for the average interest rates, but I don't know how sort of that translates into actually calculating future interest earnings, and what that would look like compared to this year's budget and what you're actually expecting this year and going forward. If that gap that you saw last year is kind of baked in going forward in the methodology, or if it should at some point average out and true up.
Yeah, I think this year, looking at where our final budget came in, we should close that gap up significantly. It is this is a line that I think going further out, we tend to, it really doesn't seem that long ago that you were excited to get, that 2% rate. If inflation does start to drive down, these rates will start to drive down as well. But this is a line that I think we have to stay a little bit lower as we stretch out and then adjust the next year. So, as we do our next round of projections, then for 25-26 coming up, we're able to forecast that a little bit more tightly based on what our actual portfolio is.
Definitely, yeah, good.
Rate. Everything is above 4% on the grade.
All right, item 5 is future agenda items. See if I have anything of right now, but that we're on, that they're looking to have. Obviously, you just email. You can't think of it, like you drive it home, email me and Tony.
There's a question to the timing of the financial dashboard work, and like, I'm not even sure what our next meeting is, but is that something that we'll see at the next meeting potentially, or is it a couple meetings out still?
When is our next meeting?
I believe we're in March next.
Like, I feel like we're having a calendar race right now. Passes.
March 11th.
Yeah, it'll already be. The version 1.0 will already exist at that.
That's for extra items. Take a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Second.
All right, Cal and Steve, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Uh,
You as well.